Welcome to They Live by Film. My name is Adam Lundy, and this is the first video on our new YouTube channel. If you're one of our podcast listeners and made your way over here, you are very welcome. And if you are new to our content and want to check out our podcast, hit the link in the description. We discuss all types of films, from silent classics to crazy horror films, along with conducting exclusive interviews with the biggest names in the boutique Blu-ray and film restoration game. So the content we're going to be looking at today is something completely different to what we've ever done on the podcast, because you can't really do this kind of thing in an audio format. We're going to be doing a tier list. As you can see, I already have it up on the screen. So we're going to be ranking some films. I'm basing this really on three main pieces of criteria. So first of all, influence, so how much it's influenced the world of cinema. Two, trying to be objective as possible about how enjoyable the film is, how good it is as an actual piece of filmmaking. Again, trying to be objective as possible with that. I'm really going to be basing that more so on how often I hear people tell me that they like this film, or how often I've seen people say they like this film. And finally, my own enjoyment. How much do I like it? The Adam influence, if you will. Because at the end of the day, it's my tier list. So I'm going to rank it in a way that I enjoy also. So what are we going to be ranking? As you can probably tell by the title, we're going to be looking at films from the French New Wave. For those who are maybe a bit unfamiliar with the French New Wave, it was a film movement that started in the 1950s in France and went on for about 2 decades. Really was earmarked by creativity and anarchy, really, within how to make films. The films in this era, and the filmmakers especially, really changed how films could be made. They really sort of brought in what would later become indie filmmaking, shooting out on the streets with not much equipment going, changing how scripts work, how film structure could work. It was incredibly influential, changed cinema forever. So let's just have a look at some films in this era and put them in an order. So the first film we're going to look at is probably the most well sort of known film in the French New Wave era. It's often misquoted that it's the film that started French New Wave. It isn't. It's early. It's 1960, but the French New Wave did start a few years earlier than that. But this is the film that really kicked off people really taking it seriously as a film movement. It completely changed the landscape of cinema. It's incredibly influential. It's by Jean-Luc Godard, who can be a bit of a contentious name in filmmaking. He started off his work making sort of very freewheeling films about challenging the notions of cinema, and kind of became more and more, maybe pretentious is the wrong word, but kind of more and more pretentious as his career went on and his films become more dense. Towards the end of his career, he was making essentially video collages. But Breathless is a very enjoyable film. It's very fun. It's one of those films that's kind of over talked. I don't think it's Godard's best film, personally. Naturally, it's his first film. It's very hard to make your best film your first one. But we can't understate its influence. It's one of those films that is just synonymous with cinema. It's synonymous with the French New Wave. So let's figure out where we're going to actually rank this. So let me just make this a little bit smaller. I'm going to crop it, actually. And we'll make it a little bit smaller. For me, there's 2 films that could be S tier, and we're going to get to the other one later on. I think we have to put Breathless in the S tier, purely based on influence. It's very hard to overstate how important this film is, even if you're not familiar with the French New Wave and you're maybe like a new Hollywood fan. Film that you watch now would not be the same if not for Breathless. So for that reason alone, even though it may not be my favorite film from Godard or my favorite film that we're going to talk about today, its influence alone makes it S tier. There's no way we could put it any lower. So we talked about what is Godard's most important film, and I mentioned that Breathless wasn't my favorite, so we might as well talk about my favorite Godard film, and that's Vivre sa vie, or My Life to Live, the English title. A film, as we can see in the image here, starring Anna Karina in what I think is one of the best performances in film history. It's an incredibly simple film. It is essentially a series of tableaus or short stories in the life of Anna Karina's character, who slowly descends into becoming a prostitute. Um, it's very, very different. It's not very freewheeling like Breathless or like something else like Band Apart, where Goddard's like clearly having fun with playing with the notions of cinema. This film is a bit more serious, but also is very inventive and does things that you would never have seen before. Probably the best example from this film of something that's just completely crazy to think about doing would be that Goddard does a whole scene where Anna Karina's character is talking and it's shot completely from behind her, so all you see is the back of her head for a solid couple of minutes. So would never have been thought about in classic Hollywood. Maybe you'd see it now, but it's something that was completely just never done before back in Godard's day when he was working on it. So where are we going to put Viva sa vie? So let me just crop it down first just to make it a little bit smaller. As I said, it's my favorite film from Godard, so we already know it's going to rank pretty highly purely based on that. Now, I don't think we can put it in the S tier because it's just Breathless is the watermark. This is where things this is the watershed here. This is where we can't move anything beyond unless it's just as influential as Breathless. So for that reason, I'm putting it in the A tier. It's one of my favorite films. It's an amazing picture. If you haven't seen it for whatever reason, I highly recommend it. It's going in the A tier. It's on my S tier. If I was doing this purely on enjoyment from me, it would be going in the S tier. But because it's not as influential as Breathless, I'm putting it in the A tier. And the A tier is great. A, B, C. A lot of these sections you're going to think, Adam, that's not great. You should have put that a little bit higher. A tier is great. Often A tier is the S tier. So we have to remember that influence is taken into account here. So moving away from Godard now, let's look at probably the one other director that is incredibly influential out of this era, and that is Francois Truffaut. And we're going to look at his film Shoot the Piano Player. We will have another Truffaut film come up, the one that you're probably expecting us to talk about, but we'll talk about Shoot the Piano Player first because it doesn't get as much clout as his other films, and I think it's a fun little picture. It's probably as close to the Godard anarchic style that Truffaut ever got. It's very much a sort of crime caper, but has that sort of French New Wave jazzy pizzazz where it's not really about the crime, it's more about the people and how they interact with each other. I like this film. I've seen it a couple of times. I wouldn't say that I love it as much as I say love Viva sa vie. It's also not as influential, but I think it's a good film. I've never heard anyone say anything bad about Shoot the Piano Player. But I've also never heard anyone say it's their favorite movie. But I really like it. So I think from that perspective, we know that it's not as influential as Breathless, and I don't like it as much as Viva sa vie, but I think it's good. So I'm gonna put this on the B tier. I think this is a B tier movie, which again is not bad. B does not mean bad. Shoot the Piano Player is a really good film. It's really enjoyable. It's really fun. If you are looking at getting into Truffaut, and you don't want to go for the obvious choice, which we'll speak about a little bit later, I think Shoot the Piano Player is a really good introduction. It's very fun. It's very freewheeling. You're not going to sit there and have to scratch your head for 2 hours wondering what the hell is going on. It's just a good time, but unfortunately, maybe just not as influential as the other films. The next one we're going to talk about, as we can see, is Elevator to the Gallows. It's also known as Lift to the Scaffold in the UK, which is a terrible name. Elevator to the Gallows is way cooler than Lift to the Scaffold, so I'm going to call it that, even though I'm not from the US. The US title is so much better. This film, technically, it's contentious as to whether this is even French New Wave. I definitely think it is. If you watch this film, it embodies so much of what was to come. But it just came out a few years prior to some of the big hitters, so it kind of gets forgotten about when you talk about the journey of French New Wave from where it began to kind of where it started to fizzle out. Elevator to the Gallows is kind of like the weird child that came first, and people kind of forget about him. It's made by a dude called Louis Malle, who's a really good filmmaker. This film, it stars, as you can see in the poster, it stars Jean Moreau, and And it's a really interesting film. So essentially, just to give you kind of a basic rundown of the plot, it kind of takes place in three stories that are interconnected, running concurrently. So the first is a guy who decides he's going to off his boss and steal a load of money from him. But unfortunately, as after he does it, he gets trapped in the elevator and can't escape. This is then followed by Jean Moreau's character, who is the wife of the boss and is having an affair with the guy who is going to kill him. And as she waits for him, so that they can run off together. And it also intersects this two teenage couple who steal the guy's car and drive past Jean Moreau. And Jean Moreau thinks that her partner has basically gone and run off on her as well. So really interesting film dynamic, something that's very influential on something like Tarantino, who will sometimes have stories running concurrently. This is definitely influential from that point of view. The soundtrack is one of the best soundtracks ever. It's done by Miles Davis, and it's an incredible soundtrack. A lot of people will have heard some of the songs on that if you're a jazz fan, even if you've never seen the film. It's a very, very highly regarded film score. Now, the question is, do I like Elevator and the Gallows? The answer is yes, I do like Elevator and the Gallows. I like it a little bit less every time I see it, is my problem. When I first saw it, I thought this is like the coolest movie ever. And then I watch it more, and over years I've kind of gone, yeah, this is cool. Jean Moreau's walking around Paris, Moby. That's nice. And don't get me wrong, I love Jean Moreau. Fantastic actress. She has been in some of the most iconic films ever. But yeah, I think I enjoy Elevator to Gallows a little bit less as time has gone on. It's become less cool, I guess, maybe is the best way to put it. And as I mentioned earlier, it's not as influential. It often gets forgotten about. But anyone I know that's seen it has always said that they like it. So I think for that reason, this is going to go up on the B tier with Shoot the Piano Player. I think that's a fair place to put it. It's a really good film. It's a really good film, but it's not as influential as Breathless, and it's not as good as Vivre sa vie. If you're looking for a double feature of crime capers that have a bit more of a human story and a human angle to them, then I don't think you can go wrong with a double feature of Shoot the Piano Player and Elevator to the Gallows. Now, at this point in the video, you're probably asking, Adam, show us some films you don't like. Okay, no problem. I can do that, no problem at all. We're going to talk about another Godard film, and this will prove that I don't just love everything Godard does. He made a film called Made in USA, as you can see on the poster starring Anna Karina. And I do not like this movie at all. This is where I mentioned earlier Godard became a little bit more pretentious as time went on. This was kind of the start where he was just making really dense films where you could tell he's critiquing something, but exactly what he's trying to do and how he's trying to say it is just really, really tough to enjoy and to grasp. I don't like Made in USA at all. I thought I would love it when I saw the poster for it and I read the sort of synopsis about what it was about. I thought this is going to be great. It's going to be another cool crime caper from Godard, but this time it's in really nice color. I can't wait. And it was just a huge, huge disappointment. I didn't know what was going on 95% of the time. So this is definitely a film I don't like. It's not very influential, and I don't often hear people talk about it either. So where are we going to put this? I think realistically, maybe F tier is harsh. Maybe it's not as bad as I say it is. I think F tier might be harsh because Anna Karina is in it, and I do like Anna Karina. And to be fair, she's actually not bad in this movie. It's totally not her fault that there is essentially no script, or if there is a script, it just makes no sense at all. So I'm going to put it in the E tier, purely based on Anna Karina goodwill. If Anna Karina wasn't in this movie, it would probably be F tier. Do not recommend Made in USA unless you are a huge Godard fan, you want to be a completionist. If you're a casual watcher and you're thinking about starting the French New Wave, do not start with Made in USA, and don't finish it with Made in USA either. Just avoid it. It's not worth your time, in my opinion. So next up, we're going to talk about another filmmaker from the French New Wave that is incredibly influential, incredibly highly regarded, and that's Agnès Varda. And we're going to talk about her film Le Bonheur. We're going to talk about her again in a little bit later, but I have to talk about this movie because I absolutely love it. I went in pretty blind, didn't really know what to expect when I first saw it, and it just blew me away. Um, she really, really completely just turns the sort of romance film on its head in the same way that Jordan Peele turned horror on its head with Get Out. I would call this the Get Out of romance movies. It is fantastic. It's a film that, depending on who you are, you might see the film in different ways. I personally felt brainwashed when I was watching this movie, and I'll tell you briefly why. So to give you the sort of rundown of the film, it's essentially starring this little family here, this dude, his wife, and their two little kids, who are, for all intents and purposes, really happy. He's a really great dad. He's a great husband. He does his best. Really, they just have a nice little life. But then he decides to hook up with this chick who works in the post office for no real reason at all. They fall in love for all intents and purposes, but he also still shows his wife that he loves her as well. And I was essentially, when I was watching this film, I was at this point, and just to sort of preface this, I cannot stand infidelity. Even like seeing cheating in films and stuff just gives me a knot in my stomach. It's just something that really grates me. But I was kind of like siding with this guy. I was like, oh, like he really does love his wife and this girl from the post office. What a great dude. And I realized this is exactly what Varda wanted to do. You know, she purposely made this film really poppy and colorful and beautiful, and really sort of like a romance film, in order to just kind of brainwash you a little bit into thinking that this guy was doing a good thing when really he wasn't. And the film is so excellent at that. It's not until the last few minutes when everything kind of crashes down and you realize, what was I just watching? Why was I trusting this guy? It's a fantastic film. It's unfortunately not talked about enough, in my opinion. I think not enough people have seen it to be as influential as another one of Varda's films that we'll talk about a little bit later. But for me, this is my favorite Varda film. It's an incredible watch. It's an incredible viewing experience. One of those ones where anyone I know has seen it, they all say that they love it. I love it as well. This is going into the A tier for me, going right up beside Vivre sa vie. Again, the only reason this is not S tier is purely based on the fact that it's not more influential. If it was more influential, this is an S tier movie, hiding in an A tier, basically. So if you haven't checked out La Bonne Heure, or if you're wanting to get into Varda, incredible film, cannot recommend it higher. At this stage of recording, we're about halfway through our pick, so I'm just going to quickly stop and just ask, if you're enjoying the content, please like, subscribe. We're going to have a lot more videos coming out. We're going to have more tier lists like this, but we are going to have different types of videos like Blu-ray unboxing videos, standard reviews, all that kind of stuff coming in the future. So like this video, hit subscribe, even leave a comment below once you get to the end of the video and you see all the stuff that I've picked. If you think I've missed any big films, leave a comment below. If you completely agree with me, leave a comment below. We want to get engagement here. We want people talking about this stuff, and I'll happily try and fight my opinion in the comments with you guys. But for now, we're going to move on. So we're going to talk about an Alain Resnais film, Hiroshima Mon Amour. This film is incredible. This is probably, if I'm talking purely objectively speaking, this is one of the best films ever made, just from a pure technical filmmaking point of view. Resnais is very much known for his filmmaking technical ability. He was able to create amazing shot composition, amazing tracking shots is probably what he's most well known for, and they're all here in Hiroshima Mon Amour, which is a really groundbreaking story as well about the love between a European woman and a Japanese man, sort of post the dropping of the bombs on Hiroshima. In terms of pure influence, it is incredibly influential. It is the kind of film that teeters between a standard sort of boiling drama and something a bit more surreal and ethereal, which is something that's become very popular in recent years, like with films like from Denis Villeneuve and Chris Nolan and stuff. I think Hiroshima Mon Amour is head and shoulders above anything those guys have ever made, but it laid the groundwork for that kind of filmmaking where you can have a dramatic story while also including sort of elements that are almost sort of surreal or sort of completely outside the norm. Do I like it? Yes, of course I do. It's an amazing picture. It's one of the best films I've ever seen. For that reason, I think, and this might be a little bit contentious considering the other picks I'd put, but I think I have to put this in the A tier, or the S tier, I should say. I think I have to put it up here. This one might be a bit controversial. Maybe it's not as influential on face value that something like Breathless is, but I think it's important. I think without this film, you don't get as many of the kind of sort of serious but surreal drama films that have come out in the 40, 50 years since Hiroshima Mon Amour came out. Actually more than 40, 50. This came out in 1958 or 59 if I remember correctly, so we're talking about 60, 70 years almost. Without this film, cinema isn't the same, so for that reason it has to go into the S tier. The Umbrellas of Cherbourg, Jacques Demy film. This is a really special film. It's really unique in a way that it is a musical, but it's a musical unlike any other. A lot of the time with film musicals, you'll have your standard dialogue, and then they'll sing a song about their feelings, and then they'll go back to standard dialogue. But Umbrellas of Cherbourg is different in a way that everything is sang. Every line of dialogue in this film is sang. There's music accompanying it all. It's very strange to watch. There's no other film like it. But it's also a really, really engaging story, a really sweet story. My problem is that I don't love it as much as other people do. I know that a lot of people love this film, and Jacques Demy in particular. And I'm not a huge lover of his films in general. There's definitely a few that I really like, and Umbrellas of Cherbourg is one of the ones that I really like, but I'm not a musical guy, and even something like this where it's not quite a musical in the classical sense, it's still enough of a musical for me to kind of not be too into it. I think if I'm being fair, we're putting this on the B tier just because of how sort of universally beloved it is. I don't think it's actually all that influential. There's not a lot of films after this that did the similar kind of shtick with everything being sang. So it's actually not as influential as one might initially think. And I don't love it. It's not definitely not up there with La Bonheur and Vivre sa vie. But I think having it up here with Shoot the Piano Player and Elevator to Gallows, I think that's a fair ranking. If you think I'm wrong, let me know. But I'm gonna put this in the B tier purely because I know that a lot of people love this film and this filmmaker. Let's talk about another film I don't really like, and this could be a contentious one. Le Beau Serge is made by Claude Chabrol, who's an interesting guy because he's kind of made his career a bit more out of being compared to Hitchcock than something like Le Beau Serge, which is very much more in the line of standard French New Wave. It's about this people in a small town just sort of dealing with life. Le Beau Serge is important in the way that it's regarded as the first French New Wave film, even though it came out the same year as Elevator to the Gallows. When you're talking about the timeline of French New Wave, everyone kind of points to Le Beau Serge being the starting point. It certainly stars, some people that sort of went on to have really great careers. It is technically a film that's fine. I don't really see anything all that wrong with the filmmaking per se, but if I'm being honest, I just don't really like it. That's just it, really. When I watched it, I was expecting something really, really good, and it was okay. If I can even call it that, it's unremarkable. Maybe is a better way to put it. Which might sound harsh, but I'm just being realistic here. It's also not that really influential. There's not a lot of films that came after Le Beau Serge that were like Le Beau Serge. There wasn't a load of imitators like with other types of films that we've seen here so far. I also don't see all that many people actually talking about how much they love it. Now, I don't think it's a bad film, so I can't put it down in the E tier to hang out with Made in USA, because I don't think the film is bad. I think that would be a bit of a stretch to say that, but I just don't find it overly enjoyable. It's not overly influential. It's definitely not as influential as it technically should have been, considering it was considered the first film in this whole movement. And like I said, I just don't really see a lot of LeBeau Surge super fans out there on Reddit and stuff. So I think it's fair to put this into D tier. If you're a LeBeau Surge super fan and you think I'm wrong, tell me why I'm wrong. I would love to. I'm always happy to change my opinion on stuff if given a reason to. But yeah, I think LeBeau Surge has to go into D tier. I don't like it that much. It's not very influential, and I just never really see a lot of love for it. I just showed you one D tier movie. Maybe it's time to show you what could be another. We're going to talk about an Eric Romer film, and when I was making this sort of list, I'm not just pulling these out of thin air. I was going through and sort of making a list for myself of films I wanted to talk about, and I wanted to try and touch on all the major filmmakers of the French New Wave, especially the ones that sort of came to prominence in the 60s. And Eric Romer is one that we kind of have to talk about. I actually don't really like his stuff, and it's weird for me because for all intents and purposes I should like his films. A lot of the films that sort of were influenced by his films I like, so like the Before trilogy by Richard Linklater, for example, those are some of my favorite movies. And Eric Romer was kind of doing that stuff before a lot of other people were. So I should like his movies, but I've just never been able to connect with any of them. The one that I've picked for this is called La Collectionneuse. And it's just a film about really obnoxious people hanging out in the sun in this villa, and I just don't give a crap about any of them or their lives or their problems. They're just annoying, sort of privileged people, and I can get somewhat that people might enjoy watching these people have poor lives, but I just don't get anything from it. So I'll just crop this down first, and then we can talk about where we're gonna place this. I think I already know where, but I'll give my reasoning. So with Collectionneuse, I definitely don't like it. I don't think it's a bad film. It's not bad in a way that Made in USA is technically probably a bad film. Collectionneuse is not technically a bad film. In fact, there's quite a lot of things in this film that are quite nice to look at. The camera work is quite nice. Probably just more down to the setting than the actual technical filmmaking. Eric Romer is very influential, but I don't think La Collectionneuse is very influential. I've never really seen people reference it when talking about their works and stuff that was important to them. I've never seen it in a Criterion top 10, on their website or anything like that. I've also never seen a lot of love for it. People more talk about The Green Ray or Claire's Knee when we're talking about Romer films. So for me, I'm going to put it on the D tier with LeBeau Surge. I probably like it less than LeBeau Surge, but that's not saying that much. I do think, like LeBeau Surge, it is technically a good film, just one that I don't really enjoy. That's also not super influential in its own right, as opposed to, Romer's entire sort of filmography being influential just for his style. So I think it's going to hang out there in the D tier with LeBeau Surge. Watch it if you want, but I'm not going to sit here and recommend it to you, essentially. It's come to my attention that we need a C tier movie, so this is going to be one of the hotter takes of this video. We're going to talk about Céline and Julie Go Boating by Jacques Rivette. I actually watched this film pretty recently, so it's fresh in my mind in the best way it could possibly be. This film is really wild. So it's sort of starts off like a cool sort of standard French New Wave film of these two cool chicks who start hanging out. They become friends. They get up to all kinds of hijinks, and then it becomes this kind of meta murder mystery kind of halfway through the film. And I can see why people like that, but for me it was just kind of like, okay, did Rivette just kind of have two ideas about two different films and then just put them together? Yeah, I don't love this film like other people do, but I know a lot of people love it. And I know that a lot of people love Rivette in general. This was my first Rivette film. I haven't seen any of his other films since I watched this one, which was only a few weeks ago. So it's, like I said, it's very fresh in my mind. It is very long, so I will pre-warn potential viewers of that. It is a very long film. It doesn't feel as long as it actually is, though. Luckily, it's one of those films where there's so much happening that it does tend to kind of pass by relatively quickly. But I can't sit here and tell you that I loved it. I wouldn't be in a rush to rewatch it in the same way I would Elevator to the Gallows or Shoot the Piano Player. But it's definitely a good film. It's a good film from an objective point of view. A lot of people love it. I definitely think it's influential. So I'm going to put it on the C tier purely based on the fact that I personally don't enjoy it that much, and I wouldn't be in a rush to rewatch it in the same way I would with something like Shoot the Piano Player or Elevator to Gallows, and definitely something like Le Bonheur or Vivre sa vie, which I could watch every week for the rest of my life. I'd have no problem with that. Definitely could not watch Celine and Julie go boating once a week for the rest of my life. So I think in that reason, it's going to sit down there on the C tier. So this film that we're going to talk about now is super interesting. It's by a guy called Chris Marker, and it's called La Jetée. It is such a unique experience. It is a shorter film, and it's comprised solely of photographs and sound. So there's no sort of moving images here. It's not a standard film. It's purely made up of photographs and then you have dialogue and voiceover accompanying it, and it's telling you the story. Really interesting story as well, all about time travel and fate and destiny, apocalypse, all that kind of stuff. The stuff that sort of modern sci-fi is really built upon. In terms of influence, it's incredibly influential, and the best example of how it's influential is the fact that this film was actually remade as 12 Monkeys, which a lot of people might be familiar with, starring Bruce Willis and Brad Pitt, which is a great film in its own right. But La Jetée is just, it's phenomenal. And it's so unique, like I said, with the way they use the photographs to tell the story. It's just something like you would have never seen before as a filmmaking technique. And this is what I was talking about earlier when talking about with the French New Wave filmmakers, how they found ways to change cinema and sort of rip up the rule book. La Jetée is a perfect example of that. Can I sit here and say it's as influential as Breathless to the sort of wider film world? Probably not. But it's obviously influential enough that it was remade as a essentially a Hollywood blockbuster, starring massive actors. It is really enjoyable and it is really well made. I don't think I can quite put an S tier, but it's definitely an A tier movie. With it being a short film, it's something that you can easily turn on anytime you want and just sort of watch it and enjoy it. I think that pretty much everybody can get something out of it, despite, like I said, not having a proper sort of moving image. It's still incredibly engaging. The photography is really, really nice, and it's a really great story. So yeah, La Jetée, it's an A tier movie. Again, like these two, it is essentially an S tier movie hiding in the A tier purely based on the fact that it's not as influential to the wider film world. There wasn't a ton of films made after this that are made up of photographs, but the story itself is obviously influential in the fact that it was remade in Hollywood. So this next film we're going to talk about is a very Marmite film. It's one of those ones that people either love or they hate, and it's purely just because of the type of film. So it's another Resnais film, and it is incredibly surreal and mind-boggling. I wish I could give you an overview of the plot, but there isn't really one, other than it essentially takes place in this sort of large chateau full of rich, swanky people. This one guy goes up to this woman and insists that they met each other last year at this place called Marienbad. She doesn't know what he's talking about, and he is essentially trying to convince her that they know each other. That is the most sort of top level face value plot I can give you for this movie. There is so many different interpretations and ways of reading it and ways of looking at this film that can change. And it will change not just each time you watch the film, but even 10 times during the film. I watched this for the second time last year for an episode of the podcast that we did, that we paired it alongside Mulholland Drive. And throughout that film, I changed my mind about what this film was about, like at least 5 times. And you would do the same as a viewer. I personally love it. Despite the fact that it has no proper strong plot, there's just something about the way that Resnais makes films and sort of composes shots and edits his films together that just really it's really hypnotic is kind of the best way I can put it. It just kind of puts me in a trance, puts me in the zone, can't take my eyes off it. You know, it's a kind of film that you could have playing at the back of a party or at an art installation, and people can just sort of sit in and get engrossed by it and kind of move on. But I would also just sit there and just watch it over and over again. It's just a really hypnotic, engrossing watch. Not everybody feels that way, though, as if you've listened to that episode of the podcast, you'll know that not everybody feels that way about this film. Some people don't like the fact that it offers no real resolution. there's clues, but there's not clues in a way that there is in, say, Mulholland Drive, that lets you solve what the film is about. Even the writer, the co-writer of this film, essentially said that the meaning is not important. It's just about you enjoying the visual medium of film. So it's possible that, you know, the film has no actual meaning, and everyone who kind of makes an interpretation is essentially grasping at straws. And that's why I said it's a bit of a controversial film, that some people just hate the fact that they can't solve it, and others are just happy to go along with the ride. I am certainly in the latter camp. I love this movie. I will continue to watch it as time goes on, and continue to have my brain destroyed trying to figure out what it means. I don't think I can put it in the S tier, because I just don't think it's as important as Hiroshima Mon Amour. But this is an A tier movie for sure. Anyone who doesn't like last year in Marion Bad, it's okay to be frustrated that you can't figure out the puzzle. It's okay. You don't need to worry about it. You can just enjoy the film for what it is, and that is a crazy, surreal trip. So I mentioned earlier that we were going to come back and talk about Agne Varda, and it'd be remiss if we were to do this and not talk about Cleo from 5 to 7. This was not her first film. She arguably started the French New Wave right back in the early 50s with a film called La Pointe Courte. But Cleo from 5 to 7 was her big sort of breakthrough, and it's a really great film. The critics love it. It was ranked really high in the recent Sight and Sound poll. It was right up there. It's definitely in the top 50, maybe even in the top 20. I can't remember exactly, but the critics love it. I love Varda in general as a filmmaker. I think she's phenomenal. Maybe doesn't get as much clout as the male filmmakers like Godard and Truffaut, but I think she's right up there alongside them in terms of actual filmmaking ability. She's made some wonderful films. Cleo from 5 to 7 is very interesting. It is essentially 2 hours in the life of a celebrity who is awaiting results from some medical tests, and she essentially just spends the time wandering around Paris, meeting sort of interesting characters, sort of getting different sort of views on life, as she's having this sort of mini existential crisis, and this sort of mini sort of staring at the face of mortality part. So Cleo from 5 to 7, from a ranking point of view, I have to decide where to put this, and this is probably a tough one to rank because, like I said, the critics love it and a lot of people love it. It's actually not that influential though, weirdly enough. There wasn't a ton of imitations of Cleo from 5 to 7. And I also don't like it as much as Le Bonheur. This is probably controversial, but I'm going to put this in the B tier. This is a film that could certainly be in the A tier, but if I'm thinking to myself, what would I rather rewatch, Le Bonheur or Cleo from 5 to 7? And I would rather rewatch Le Bonheur. So I think for that reason alone, it's going to hang out with Shoot the Piano Player, Elvira Nogales, and Umbrellas of Cherbourg. And look, when it comes to tier lists, like I said, A, B, C, these aren't bad rankings by any means. The B tier looks great, to be honest with you, in terms of you're going to show up to a French New Wave film festival and these were the 4 films they were going to show. I wouldn't be disappointed. I think that's a pretty good lineup. So please don't come and give out to me that I put this film in the B tier, because B does not mean bad by any means. Now, one thing I know for a fact is that this is going to be the most controversial choice that I'm going to make in this video. We're going to talk about a Truffaut film. It's called Jules and Jim, or Jules et Jim to give it its French title. I hate this movie. I hate it so bad. I watched it after watching a few Truffaut movies. I was just kind of making like my way through his filmography. And this one's pretty early. And I was like, yeah, the plot sounds a little bit interesting. Oh, it stars Jeanne Moreau. Perfect. She's always great. I hate it. I hate it so bad. I think it's more so the characters that I hate more than the plot. I think the plot is very, very thin. It's not just thin from like a French New Wave, let's just have fun with it kind of point of view. It's just thin. There's just not a lot to go on with this plot, and it just feels like the whole way through the film is just dragging on and dragging its feet. But the characters are painfully annoying. They are insufferable. They are not likable in any way, shape, or form. They're probably not supposed to be likable, but there's just nothing redeeming about any of them. They're all terrible people. I was really disappointed when I watched this film. And I know a lot of people actually do like it, but I think a lot of people as well are in the same camp as me where they just can't find enjoyment out of it purely based on the fact that the characters are just terrible human beings. I said this was going to be the most controversial choice of this, and it's not that I'm going to put it in the E tier, it's because this is going in the F tier. This is my F tier movie. I'm only doing one. This is an F tier movie. This is an avoid movie. I implore you to avoid it. And I know this is not a common opinion, but yeah, sorry, this is my list. I'm not going to apologize. This is my list. This is an F tier movie. Now, before all the Truffaut fanboys come from my head after that last segment, let's talk about the 400 Blows. I'm gonna make it up to you guys. We'll talk about the 400 Blows. This is, when I went into this sort of making this list, there was two films that came to my head that were going to be S tier. Breathless was obviously number one, and the number two has to be the 400 Blows. It came out the year before Breathless, but you know its influence is as long lasting as Breathless. They're two very different kind of films. I always thought that Truffaut was a bit more of a classicist. Godard kind of ended up hating that stuff and wanted to move away from it, but Truffaut, rather than kind of rip up the rule book on classic filmmaking, decided to kind of reinvent it in a more realistic way. And I think the 400 Blows really embodies that in the best way possible. It would be impossible to tell the story of film and the story of the French New Wave without talking about the 400 Blows. So, like I said, don't worry, Truffaut fanboys. If you are annoyed that I put Shoot the Piano Player in the B tier, and even more annoyed that I put Jules et Jim in the F tier, hopefully you'll be happy with the fact that this film, alongside Breathless and Hiroshima Mon Amour, have to go in the S tier. If anything, this film deserves its own tier above S tier, because even though, you know, I might not love it as much as some of the other films on this list, we cannot talk about movies without the 400 Blows. It's that important to the history of cinema in general, not just the French New Wave, but cinema. It changed movies. It changed the course of cinema. The 400 Blows is an S tier movie. There is no debating that. You can come and talk to me in the comments about it, but there is no debating the fact that this is up here in the S tier. So guys, that is our finished tier list. Like I said, please, if you like the video, hit the like button, hit subscribe, because we're going to have a lot more content coming out over the next few weeks and months. And not just this kind of stuff, but also, like I said earlier, unboxing videos, standard reviews. We're going to try and mix it up as much as we can between myself, Chris, and Zach. Like I said, if you're completely new to our content, go to the link in the description. We have over 80 episodes now of our podcast that you can listen to on any sort of streaming service that you would use. And if you don't mind as well, leave a comment below, even if you want to call me out for any of my choices, if you think I missed out on any sort of glaring films, which I probably did, and I probably did purely from the sake of time, but maybe I might do a part 2 in the future if there's enough recommendations. If you have any other ideas for any other type of tier list you'd like to see, leave a comment below. It really helps with the YouTube algorithm. If you could give it a share on your socials, that would be really appreciated as well. For now, I've been Adam. Hope you have a good day. Take care.